Islands usually mean paradise. These places are more like graveyards with good views. I'm talking about spots where entire communities starve to death, where polar bears learn to hunt humans, and where people still choose to live on top of volcanoes that already killed their families once. These abandoned places show you just how many different ways things can go wrong when you're stuck in the middle of the ocean with nowhere to run. I'm Mike with List 25, and here are 25 deserted islands with bizarre and forgotten histories. But before we begin, don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you don't miss it on any new content. With that being said, let's go island hopping. 25. The Isle of Demons. For this first island, we're traveling back to the 1500s. Picture you're sailing through the ice fog near what is now known as Newfoundland, Canada. Suddenly, out of the mist, an island appears. The locals whisper that it's cursed. They say it's a place crawling with demons and restless spirits. But, was it real, or just a mirage? This was the lore of the infamous Isle of Demons. Adding to the creepiness is that this was a phantom island that people swore existed, but that's much debated. Nevertheless, it terrified sailors for more than a century. While maps from the time marked it as a real location, they also warned travelers to never set foot on the land, or they may face certain doom. This legend grew darker with the story of French noblewoman Marguerite de la Roque. She claimed she found herself stranded in its wilderness, where she battled wild animals, starvation, and an overwhelming sense that she wasn't alone. While some claim she was haunted by the demons who lived there, her survival became tangled in the land's sinister reputation. By the mid-1600s, the Isle of Demons began to disappear from maps, as if it were swallowed by the sea itself. There are some historians who believe it was nothing more than a misunderstanding of First Nations folklore, an iceberg mistaken for land, or an error in mapping. However, for sailors of the past, this was never just a myth. 24. Mas a Tierra. Imagine being stuck on a remote island with nothing but rats, goats, and your own wit. Sounds like something out of a reality show, right? For Scottish sailor Alexander Selkirk, this was no game. After arguing with his captain about the seaworthiness of the ship, he made a bold choice to stay behind on a Chilean island known as Mas a Tierra. He made this brave, or reckless, move in 1704 and spent the next 4 years figuring out how to survive completely on his own. He used pimento trees to build huts. He hunted the wild goats and even trained stray cats to keep the rats away while he slept. And, to keep him from losing his mind, he prayed, danced with the animals, and sang. By the time rescuers showed up in 1709, Selkirk was so wild and rugged that he was barely recognized as human. His ordeal was the inspiration for Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. While it's not a literal biography, every wild detail traces back to the left-behind sailor. Defoe began writing the classic novel in 1719 and turned this tale of woe into one of epic adventures. 23. Roatán Island. Roatán Island is a picture-perfect tropical paradise, but it has a past that's darker than any glossy travel brochure will ever advertise. Long before scuba divers and cruise ships started making rounds, this Caribbean island was home to the Paya people. For decades, they lived peacefully off the land and sea. That is, until colonial powers made landfall. Spain and Britain wrestled over control of the island, which led to it becoming a hotspot for pirates in the 1600s. Yes, pirates. Real ones who used Roatán Island as a hideout while plotting their next raids and lying in wait for passing ships to rob so they could steal their loot and stash it. In the 18th and 19th centuries, Britain briefly took control of the land before finally handing it over to Honduras in 1859. Roatán became home to the Garifuna, who built a strong cultural presence that remains to this day. Beneath the coral reefs and resorts lies a history soaked in blood, betrayal, and buried secrets. They say if you listen closely to the crashing waves, you might just hear whispers of ghostly pirate crews still guarding their treasure. 22. Elephant Island. Named either for its shape or for the elephant seals that once crowded its shoreline, this island's real legacy is bound to one of the bleakest chapters in exploration history. Elephant Island is one of the most unforgiving places on Earth. Nestled in the South Shetland Islands, it's covered in ice and lashed relentlessly by strong winds. It's a place no one has ever set up permanent residency. and for good reason. This is something Sir Ernest Shackleton learned all too well in April 1916. Shackleton embarked on an Imperial Trans-Antarctic expedition when his ship, the Endurance, was trapped and crushed by ice. His crew drifted on unstable ice floes for months. They were cold, starving, and utterly hopeless when they finally staggered onto Elephant Island. They thought they'd reached some sort of safety, but this was just the start of a living nightmare. There was little shelter, no reliable food, and near constant freezing storms. The men did their best building rough camps and lifeboats, but it did little to stop them from being frostbitten and suffering. Conditions were brutal, and many sailors suffered infections. After 2 weeks, Shackleton reached his breaking point and hopped in a lifeboat to find help, leaving his crew behind. They faced 4 more months of this grueling hell before being rescued when Shackleton arrived with Captain Luis Pardo on April 30th, 1916. Elephant Island remains a stark monument to human suffering and survival in one of the harshest environments in the world. 21. Palmyra Atoll. First discovered in 1798 by Captain Edmund Fanning, Palmyra Atoll was completely uninhabited, but also completely rich in resources. Its abundance of coconuts makes it a tempting target for expansion. In 1862, the Kingdom of Hawaii formally claimed the land and asserted legal control. Their hold didn't last long, though. In 1898, the USA annexed Hawaii and took control of the territories, including the deserted island. During World War II, the US Navy moved in. They built bunkers, airstrips, and stations for thousands of soldiers. The island served as a small, isolated outpost in the middle of the ocean, completely cut off from the rest of the world. When the war ended, the military left, but the buildings, barbed wire, and abandoned equipment all remained. In the decades that followed, the island was a magnet for tragedy. A double murder in 1970, sailors reported devastating shipwrecks, harsh storms, and numerous fatal incidents. Instead of a lush, lonely island, it was a place of death and destitution. Today, the land is a protected wildlife refuge. It once again is uninhabited by humans and off limits. However, the shadow of violence and misfortune adds to the lore. 20. Flannan Isles. This place is home to one of the most chilling maritime mysteries of the 20th century. It all happened in December 1900. 3 lighthouse keepers, Donald MacArthur, James Ducat, and Thomas Marshall, vanished from their post on Isla Bermeja in the most unusual and mysterious way. Their haunting disappearance was discovered by a relief ship's crew. Instead of finding the men, they found their half-eaten lunches, an overturned chair, and a clock that stopped dead. The keepers were nowhere to be found, and gone without a trace. Adding to this eerie situation was the last entry in their logbook. It noted, "Storm ended. Calm sea." Countless theories have tried to explain this vanishing act. Some believe rogue waves must have swept all 3 men away, even though the lighthouse sat high atop the cliffs. Others think sudden landslides must have swept the men away, or they were taken by foreign spies. Of course, there are also popular theories of supernatural forces taking the men out, like being eaten by a sea serpent or stolen away by a ghost ship. 14 Times journalist Mike Dash even claimed the logbook had made up entries and suggested one of the men went mad and killed the others. We'll never know what truly happened to MacArthur, Ducat, and Thomas. This mystery may stay that way forever. 19. Clipperton Island. Clipperton Island is more than just a tiny remote land in the vast Pacific. It's a place drenched in human suffering and absolute tragedy. French Captain Michel de Bocage first charted the landmass in 1711, but it gained notoriety when English pirate John Clipperton used it as a hideout. And that's just the start of the drama surrounding this island. The darkest chapter began in 1905, when Mexico tried to stake claim by sending a group of settlers to make it their own. The colony was isolated and cut off from regular supplies, though, and quickly spiraled into disaster. The struggle was brutal. Poor provisions, harsh weather, and the psychological toll of being so incredibly isolated hit everyone hard. As disease and malnutrition set in, the people fell ill, and scurvy ran rampant. By 1917, nearly everyone who was sent there died, and a few survivors told the tales of relentless suffering. 18. Snake Island. Snake Island is a little patch of land off the coast of Brazil, and it's famous for its residents. No, not people, snakes. and lots of snakes. Hence the name. It all goes back to the last ice age when the island broke off from the mainland, and over time, snakes took control. And not just any slithery reptiles, but a unique breed called the golden lancehead viper. It's a creature so deadly that its venom can kill a person in under an hour. In the early 20th century, Brazil built a lighthouse there and sent a small group of keepers to oversee the safety of crossing ships. However, the job came with relentless harassment by the snakes, forcing many to abandon their post and hightail it out of there. The solution? Burn all the vegetation in the hopes it would drive the snakes away. Did it work? Oh, absolutely not. The creatures persevered so well that Brazil had no choice but to close off the island completely in 1985. Nowadays, going there is forbidden to the public, with only a handful of scientists allowed to explore the wild habitat. 17. North Sentinel Island. For thousands of years, the Sentinelese people have lived in peace and harmony, completely isolated from the rest of the world. They aren't shy about taking down any intruder and make it clear they reject contact with outsiders. Back in 2018, a missionary by the name of John Allen Chow learned the hard way that the natives do not welcome anyone in. He was there to spread the word of Christianity, and instead of handing out Bibles, well, he met his maker. Bows and arrows were drawn, and he didn't make it off his boat before taking his last breath. His body was never recovered. That isn't the only story that puts the island on this list. India has stepped in and created a series of strict laws to keep the population safe. In fact, approaching them is highly illegal. Even scientists and researchers are told to keep their distance. This hands-off policy has turned the land into a time capsule. It's one of the only places where humanity is not influenced by the modern world. 16. Hashima Island. Want to go to an island that feels like it's ripped straight out of a horror movie? Well then, you should check out Hashima Island. Off the coast of Nagasaki, this landmass started out as a booming coal mining hub. In fact, at its peak, thousands of workers and their families crammed themselves into tightly packed concrete apartment blocks there. It was once the most densely populated place on Earth. It was busy, noisy, and very industrial. Adding to the already overpopulation was the dark chapter that came during World War II. As Japan's demand for coal surged, so did the need for laborers. And with few volunteers, Korean and Chinese prisoners of war were forced to the island against their will. They endured beatings, starvation, and little to no medical care. Records show death from exhaustion, malnutrition, and accidents. And sadly, there was no escape. However, by 1974, the coal ran out, and those remaining left for the mainland. Today, what remains are the haunting sights of a community frozen in time. Visitors walk amongst the hollowed-out buildings and the stairs that now lead to nowhere. 15. Okunoshima. Today, Okunoshima looks like a fluffy paradise covered in thousands of friendly bunnies who hop right up to tourists for attention and food. But Bunny Island wasn't always this way. Beneath the cuteness lies a chilling past. The tragedies also trace back to World War II, when the island was kept off maps and shrouded in secrecy because it was home to a massive poison gas factory. From 1929 to 1945, Japan produced thousands of tons of chemical weaponry. Workers inside the plant were manufacturing mustard gas and lewisite on the daily, with the factory having zero regard for their safety. No masks, no safety gear, nothing. As for the fluffy population there, some rumors state that rabbit population was once used for chemical testing, while others claim the bunnies came long after. And it's all just a fluke. Workers were left with lung damage, blindness, chronic illness, and blistering skin. Even though efforts have been taken to decontaminate the island, some historians warn that trace toxins could still linger in the soil. That doesn't stop visitors though. I mean, who can resist walking through potentially contaminated wartime ruins and being swarmed by adorable rabbits? 14. Spinalonga. This place may look like just another sun-drenched island, but its past is anything but idyllic. From 1903 to 1957, anyone in Crete who was diagnosed with leprosy, now called Hansen's disease by the way, was shipped there. They were ripped from their families and communities to be shipped off to this tiny rock and cut off from the rest of the world. Life on the island was marked with hardships in the early years. Supplies were scarce, medical treatment was hard-won, and the stigma around leprosy had the islanders completely and utterly isolated. Death often came quietly, with burials happening on the island with no chance of families reclaiming their loved ones' remains. What started as a death sentence became anything but when the people prevailed. They came together to build their own society. Schools were erected, social events were created, and the residents refused to let the stigma and disease strip away their humanity and compassion. 13. Deception Island. Down in Antarctica, this volcanic island was a bustling whaling station back in the 1900s. Every day, whales were slaughtered and their carcasses were boiled in giant vats along the shore. The island reeked of oil and decay. And that's not even the worst part. The workers lived in terrible conditions among the carcasses and decay. The weather was freezing, accidents were a daily occurrence, and medical help was rare. Many never made it off the island, and a small cemetery marks their final resting place. To top it off, nature doesn't play nice here. In the late 60s, not one, but two violent eruptions buried the scientific stations under mud and ash, forcing researchers to abandon their work and run for their lives. Things were so horrendous, the mudslide even unearthed the cemetery. Deception Island isn't just a frozen tourist attraction, it's a place shaped by death, disaster, and cruelty. 12. Jaco Island. Jaco Island is a place where mystery and beauty collide. Owned by the government of Timor-Leste, this Ninakonesentana National Park is considered sacred and has been for centuries. The Fataluku people have forbidden anyone from living there or staying overnight. Sure, visitors can explore it for the day and enjoy the sand and surf, but when the sun goes down, it's time to leave. Night belongs to the island itself. While ruins, ghost towns, and deserted islands can have an eerie stillness, Jaco Island takes this to the next level. There are no abandoned buildings or traces of settlers, just beaches, water, and wildlife. Even the approach by boat feels like crossing into another world, one that's never been touched by modern life. 11. Inishmurray. Off the coast of Ireland, this little landmass has quite the history, with centuries of isolation, hardship, and struggle under its belt. Life on the island was simple, but brutal. For over 1,000 years, monks and villagers called this unforgiving environment home. The storms were relentless. The cold Atlantic winds pushed anyone who dared settle there. In the 6th century, Saint Malaise and his monks arrived and began to build their life there. They built tiny beehive-shaped stone cells, small stone churches, and a protective stone fort. This was far from the lap of luxury, but everything was built to last and stand up to the weather. Daily life involved prayer, labor, and constant vigilance against the ocean's wrath. Generations endured, despite the isolation and lack of education and medical care. Children were born and raised without access to doctors, teachers, and even food was scarce at times. Disease and injury could be fatal. Today, remnants can be seen. The silence is haunting. 10. Isla Bermeja. For centuries, cartographers kept drawing this little island called Isla Bermeja on their maps of the Gulf of Mexico. Generation after generation of map makers insisted it was there, marking it with the confidence of someone who'd actually set foot on the place. But when modern surveyors went looking for it with all their fancy equipment, they found absolutely nothing but empty water. This is where the story takes a dark turn into conspiracy territory. Some became convinced that their own government had literally blown up the island to hand over valuable oil rights to the United States. Think about that for a second. The idea that politicians would destroy an entire piece of their own country for money is so believable that people actually bought it. The truth is probably more boring though. Isla Bermeja likely never existed. Or it was just a sandbar that got swallowed by storms and time. But there is something deeply unsettling about phantom islands that haunted maps for hundreds of years. Sailors probably spent their final moments searching desperately for shelter that was never really there. 9. Isle of the Dead. You know how some places get scary names just because they sound cool? Well, the Isle of the Dead in Tasmania earned its creepy title the hard way, by literally being a massive graveyard. This little island was where they dumped everyone who passed away at Port Arthur, which was basically Australia's version of Hell on Earth back in the 1800s. Now, here's the really messed up part. The prison buried over 1,000 people there between 1833 and 1877, and most of those poor souls don't even have their names on their graves. These guys already had their lives completely destroyed by the prison system, and then they couldn't even get their names carved in a chunk of rock when they died. The whole place became a dumping ground for human suffering. You had convicts who'd been worked to death, beaten senseless, or just gone completely insane from the brutal conditions. Even the prison guards and their families ended up there eventually, which is kind of ironic when you think about it. These days, you need a tour guide to visit, but walking around 1,000 unmarked graves on an island called the Isle of the Dead? That's not a vacation. That's asking for nightmares. 8. Chacachacare. The island of Trinidad and Tobago has a history that'll kill your appetite real quick. For over 60 years, from 1922 to 1984, this place was basically where they shipped people with leprosy to live out their final days. Once you got on that boat to Chacachacare, you probably weren't coming back. The whole setup was pretty grim when you think about it. Much like Spinalonga, Greece, families would basically have to say their goodbye forever to their loved ones who had been diagnosed with leprosy. The government's solution was simple. Stick them all on this isolated island where they couldn't infect anyone else. Dominican nuns did their best to care for these forgotten people, but it was still essentially a prison sentence with a medical excuse. They just abandoned the whole place in 1984 and better treatments came along. Now it's an overground, creepy ruin where you can still see the old building slowly being swallowed by the jungle. There's something deeply unsettling about wandering through the remains of a place where so many people were forced to spend their last years, cut off from everything and everyone they'd ever known. 17. Skeleton Island. Over in Madagascar, Skeleton Island earned its grim nickname the hard way as well, through piles of actual skeletons. This wasn't some cute tourist trap with spooky decorations. During the height of piracy in the Indian Ocean, this little island became the final stop for way too many people who thought they were heading towards fortune and adventure. Treasure hunters would show up thinking they'd struck it rich, only to find themselves face to face with disease, starvation, and pirates who weren't in a sharing mood. These gold seekers quickly realized they were more likely to become permanent residents than wealthy explorers. But the pirates themselves made things even worse. After a successful raid, they needed somewhere to dump the evidence. And by evidence, I mean the bodies of the people who got in the way. Skeleton Island became their go-to disposal site, where they dragged corpses ashore and tossed them into whatever shallow grave was convenient. No ceremony, no respect, just another skeleton for the pile. Today, the island sits empty. You've got to wonder how many unmarked graves are hidden in that jungle. 6. St. Helena. This next island isn't just famous for its volcano, but also for a famous resident who lived out his final days there. St. Helena was where the British exiled Napoleon Bonaparte to, and for good reason. It's one of the most hellish places on Earth. This rock sits in the middle of the South Atlantic, over 1,000 miles from the nearest land. To be sent there wasn't just exile, it was erasure. Napoleon arrived in 1815 and faced a very uncomfortable end to his iconic life. The island's climate was slow poison. It was humid, oppressive, and designed to break down buildings and bodies over time. Longwood House, where he was kept, was falling apart from the constant moisture. The walls wept, the floors rotted, and everything smelled like decay. It wasn't just hard on the body, it was psychological torture too. Napoleon spent his days writing memoirs and arguing with British officials about trivial matters, all while watching his body deteriorate from the conditions. He died 6 years after landing there. Some believe it was due to stomach cancer. Others suggest arsenic poisoning. Either way, this was the deadly side of the man who crowned himself the Emperor of France. 5. Bear Island. Bear Island sits like a death sentence in the middle of the Barents Sea, where geography itself seems designed to kill. The storms that hammer this place don't just bring bad weather, they bring shipwrecks. Sailors who somehow crawl onto those jagged shores discover they only delayed their deaths by a few agonizing days. With no shelter, no food, and Arctic winds that cut through flesh like knives, most of them die slowly, their bones eventually disappearing into the snow and rock. The human history here reads like a catalog of suffering. During the 1600s whaling boom, crews would slaughter everything they could find in these waters, then inevitably turn their violence on each other when competition got fierce enough. Blood spilled over territory, catches, and scraps of profit in a place where profit came soaked in death. Later, coal miners showed up thinking, well, they could tame the island through sheer determination, but the isolation and brutal working conditions broke them every time. Settlements collapsed, workers fled or died, and the island reclaimed another generation of human ambition. It remains almost completely abandoned now, with just a single weather station standing as proof that humans once thought they could survive here. 4. Blasket Islands. Off Ireland's western coast lie the Blasket Islands. Now completely abandoned, there were once vibrant Gaelic-speaking communities that persevered for centuries. The islanders lived entirely at the mercy of the Atlantic. They fished using fragile boats and farmed on patches of soil, so I think you could see the bedrock. Nevertheless, they created and maintained a strong community, persevered through traditions, storytelling, and folklore. The same isolation that gave them their unique culture is what also became its executioner. The harsh winters cut the island off from the mainland for months at a time. Families would be left stranded without supplies or medical care. Young people began abandoning the island in the 40s, fleeing to the Irish mainland and America. The remaining islanders did all they could to survive, but the population left on the land was aging, and things went from bad to worse. In 1952, the Irish government evacuated the final 22 residents, officially ending over 1,000 years of continuous habitation and closing a historic chapter in the island's history. 3. Aogashima. Aogashima has got to be one of the most messed up places people have chosen to call home. Back in 1785, this volcanic island basically tried to murder everyone living on it, and it did a pretty good job. About half the population got wiped out when the volcano violently erupted. The deadly lava swallowed up everything in its path, and the toxic gas fumes killed many. Those who survived were evacuated to the mainland. After about 50 years, the survivors and their kids came back and rebuilt everything in exactly the same spot. That sounds nice, right? Oh, but it also gets a little creepy. They literally constructed their new homes on top of where their relatives had been buried alive by molten rock. Fast forward to today, and there's still a small community of people living there like nothing ever happened. They grow their food in dirt that was mixed with volcanic ash, all while knowing that the same mountain that killed their ancestors is still very much alive. Scientists keep tabs on it, but at the end of the day, if that volcano wants to blow again, there's not much anyone can do except hope they can run fast enough. 2. St. Kilda. St. Kilda's story is what happens when isolation stops being romantic and starts being deadly. For thousands of years, the people there had figured out how to survive by catching seabirds and living off what the ocean provided. It worked fine, until the modern world started creeping in and making their traditional lifestyle look more and more like a death sentence. The trouble started when diseases from the mainland began reaching the island. The 1913 flu pandemic hit these people like a freight train, because they had zero immunity to outside illnesses. Children were dying at startling rates. The adults weren't doing much better. Their entire economy was built around catching birds from dangerous cliff faces, but when half your population is either dead or too sick to work, that system falls apart pretty quickly. By the late 20s, the remaining 36 residents were living in what basically amounted to a slow-motion apocalypse. No doctors, no medicine, no way to get help when things went wrong. They finally admitted defeat in 1930 and asked the government to get them off the island. 1. Bouvet Island. Our final stop on this journey takes us to the most isolated place on Earth. Bouvet Island sits alone in the South Atlantic. It's over 1,600 kilometers from the nearest mainland. Jean-Baptiste Charles Bouvet discovered the frozen wasteland in 1739, and it would remain essentially untouched by human civilization for the next 3 centuries. The island exists in a state of perpetual hostility towards any form of life that isn't specifically adapted to Antarctic conditions. Not only is it remote, but it's also actively dangerous to approach. The entire land is covered by glaciers and surrounded by violent seas. To reach shore safely, weather conditions must be absolutely perfect. Only a handful of scientists have ever set foot on the floating mass, and those who have only stayed long enough to collect essential data due to the severe conditions. The only beings who seem to survive for any length of time are the seabirds and seals that call the frigid island home. Well, there you have it. 25 abandoned islands where human dreams went to die in some truly wild ways. From volcanic graves to pirate dumping grounds, these forgotten places remind us that sometimes the most beautiful locations on Earth come with the darkest histories. If you like this video, make sure to check out 25 disturbing facts about our changing continents. And now, for my favorite part of any video, trivia time. I can't wait to see how many of you guys guessed this right answer without opening up your browser. Make sure to drop those answers in the comments. Which island is known as the Island of the Dolls and is covered with thousands of creepy mutilated dolls hanging from trees? Is it A, Hashima Island, Japan, B, Proveglia Island, Italy, C, Isla de las Muñecas, Mexico, or D, North Brother Island, New York? And that's it for today. But before we go, again, like I said before, like, share, comment, subscribe, notification bell. Like, it truly, truly, truly helps the channel grow so that we can keep bringing you this amazing content. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you next time. Have you been to any of these islands? Let me know in the comments below.